I think from an implementation perspective, it's important to think about three things. How are you going to sense information? How are you going to transport that information? And then what are you going to do with it? So in most Internet of Things applications, there's some remote location or locations where something is happening, right? People are accessing a building, goods are moving in and out of a warehouse, machinery is being used. So job number one is how can we sense something about the events in that location? Job number two is how we're going to get the data back to headquarters or some other place. And job number three is once we've got the information, how are we going to process it? And I think that the first two of those are relatively trivial. The third one, though, it's important to understand that we are in a new paradigm for data analysis now. In the 20th century, a CIO would invest in a system like an SAP system, and that would generate a report that a human being would look at. So probably they make a pie chart, and then the pie chart goes on a PowerPoint slide, and everybody has a meeting, and they look at the PowerPoint slide, and they make a decision. In the Internet of Things age, that doesn't work. There's too much data, too much happening in real time. So you have to invest in software that analyzes the data for you and does something. And there are two kinds of something. One is tells a human being that there's an exception in the data or there's something important happening. The second thing is potentially that system could actually just do something, right? Let's take an example. If you have an important piece of machinery in a production line, you put some sensors on it to try to understand if the machinery is working properly. Well, if it looks like an important part on the machinery is wearing out and it's going to fail in 6 months, then your business intelligence system can basically send an email to somebody and say, you need to fix this. But if the machine is failing in a way that is dangerous, going to explode, then you may want your system to just shut it down, kind of like a circuit breaker, an Internet of Things circuit breaker. Okay, so those are the three basic considerations. How am I going to get the data? How am I going to move the data? How am I going to process the data? There's another thing to keep in mind as well, though, which is to do with security. The 20th century paradigm for security was security of information. You wanted to make sure you kept your information safe. Only the right people could access it. You still have those considerations in an Internet of Things system, but there's an even more important security consideration, which is how do I make sure somebody can't take control of my machine and use it to do something bad? And it's amazing how many Internet of Things deployments don't think about that thing. They might be very careful about protecting the business data, but then you find someone can hack into, the power station, the Internet of Things power station, and turn the power off, or make the internet-enabled car flip over. And these are real examples. So when you're thinking about implementation, in addition to making sure the system works, you also have to make sure that if somebody hacks into it, they cannot do any physical harm. I don't think it's any different in Central America to the rest of the world. And that's an important thing to understand. As we move from old paradigms to new paradigms, the Internet of Things age is something that is available to everybody everywhere. This is not one of those situations where Western Europe and the United States get a technology and 10 years later Central America follows. Central America can adopt the Internet of Things right now. The Internet is here. That's kind of the only prerequisite there is, right? So I don't think you have to wait to start, but what I would say, same thing I say everywhere in the world, start small. find a real problem that you don't know how to solve any other way in your business, and do a very simple, almost like toy solution that just solves it a little bit. It doesn't need to be fancy, it doesn't need to be complicated. Just demonstrate that you can sense when one thing on one shelf in your warehouse has moved. And once you see that happen and you can get that to work, then you can move to two things on the same shelf. And eventually you can do the whole warehouse. But the way to do the Internet of Things is exactly the same way that we all learned to walk. You really want to learn to sit up first, and then maybe sort of lay down on your belly, and then crawl a little bit, and then stand up, and then you take a few steps. You don't decide you're going to run a marathon before you can sit up straight, right? So work into it gradually, but there's no reason not to start today. That varies tremendously depending on the application. There are a number of off-the-shelf hardware solutions for sensing things like temperature, motion, sound, vision. So unless the thing you want to sense is fairly esoteric, the chances are you can buy a very cheap off-the-shelf sensing system for the data capture portion. Moving things around the internet is very easy. That's just the internet. When it comes to data processing, however, there are very few turnkey solutions available to a CIO. That's probably custom software, although depending on the scale of the application, particularly if you're just looking for a kind of proof of concept, a prototype system, there's quite a lot you can do with web apps. So you can start to stitch your database together and your data capture together using a monthly subscription web app service. There's a number of them available. And that will be enough for a kind of an existence proof or a proof of concept type system, which is all you want to do at the beginning, by the way, before you invest heavily in getting some big consulting shop to write you some custom code or something. The important thing to understand is that Internet of Things deployments don't come with like a label that says Internet of Things deployment. So a lot of things that are the Internet of Things, people don't realize are the Internet of Things. So, one easy example, like here in Guatemala, is you guys have Uber. Uber is an Internet of Things company. So if you want to write a story about the Internet of Things in Guatemala, go see what Uber has done to transform transportation, like here in Guatemala City, right? That would be an example of the Internet of Things in Guatemala. And by the way, it's exactly the same as the example you might use in San Francisco, which is also interesting and important because it shows how this technology is available everywhere now, not just in certain markets. But also, here's another one, right? I have the Internet of Things in my pocket. I can find it. This is my room key for this hotel, right, that we're talking in right now. This is an RFID key, right? So I can use this to get into my room. But the other thing that's really interesting about this is, unlike using a regular key, the hotel can know automatically that I've gone into my room. If I have two keys to my room, they can know which key I used, and so on. So this is also an Internet of Things technology, but it doesn't say Internet of Things on it anywhere, and it's very easy to miss. And this is exactly the same system that the Westin Hotel in Austin, Texas, where I live, uses. So once again, you see an example of something which is being used right here in Guatemala City, but it's exactly the same as something that's being used in, for example, the United States.